Hello, we're back and we're covering Arne Næss, the Norwegian philosopher who is one of the developers of deep ecology. And so I have you looking at a video that covers Arne Næss, as well as text from the 70s, the shallow and the deep long-range ecology movement, a summary by Arne Næss. So this was a paper that he offered as a lecture in 1972 at the World Future Research Conference. And so what he's doing here is he's just laying down a basic framework for how deep ecology is to be understood. And so this is slightly different than his 8 principles, but it actually plays into the 8 principles to a certain degree as well. And then so one of the things too that is important is I had you looking at some Baruch Spinoza, and so know that Arne Næss was influenced quite strongly by Spinoza's ideas, his rationalist ideas. And so given that he was paying attention, Arne Næss was paying attention to Spinoza, that should indicate, number one, that deep ecology is not relativist, okay? Because some of these points that he makes sound relativist. And so always remember that Spinoza was a rationalist, okay? So that's key. And so when I touch on these points, I'm going to try to emphasize a little on the rationalist part of this, so that we don't get confused and start thinking that this is a relativist position of his. Okay, so right off the top, he opens with this just a very brief statement on what he terms shallow ecology, or the shallow ecology movement. And so this is just really basically this idea that we are fighting against pollution and resource depletion, and that's the only way in which we understand the way in which we're going to be working with the environment. And so the reason why that's important is to notice that, let's look at how he characterizes this: the fight against pollution and resource depletion. When we understand what those are, we're seeing those as reactionary. In other words, they're mere reactions to problems. And so then the question mark is, what are the problems to begin with that are causing these issues to be, and what can we do to start looking at the bigger picture, okay? And so that bigger picture view is important for Næss, not only in terms of deep ecology, but also philosophically, in that there's a metaphysical position whereby he's trying to see that he's trying to show us that we're not separate from these problems, we are actually causing these problems. And the shallow ecology movement is merely reactionary as a result, okay? And so that's why he doesn't give it too much room, because for him, it really is more just a reactionary position, okay? So then he goes on to offer us points on what deep ecology actually is. So deep ecology, he refers to as a total field image, or favoring the relational. So this favoring of the relational is key, or the total field image is that we need to take in the whole picture if we're going to get an understanding of our ecology, as opposed to this reactionary shallow step of reducing depletion of resources and just fighting pollution. Okay, so in other words, we need to get the whole view, which then philosophically is then a metaphysical view, because a metaphysical view is always showing us a part-whole relationship. So he's saying shallow view is only looking at part, whereas whole view is deep ecology. That's a great way of thinking about it, and that is metaphysical, by the way, okay? Not only is it metaphysical, there's also a rational aspect to that. In other words, there's a mechanism by which we understand we have a part of something in relation to a whole, okay? And that's a rational procedure, by the way, okay? So then he brings up number 2, something that he refers to as biospherical egalitarianism. So this is developing the equal right to live for all creatures, with a caveat that some killing is still necessary in terms of our means of survival, but yet as a way of thinking about this, where we're considering that we need to start thinking about how we are equal and establishing modes of being more egalitarian, rather than this idea that we are dominating other species. We are working with other species as opposed to we are trying to dominate other species, other life forms, and I guess inanimate beings as well, right? And then also considering this issue of crowding as well. So in other words, working on how it is that we are becoming overcrowded. He's not really clear on how all of that's working, but that's we'll leave that to another discussion. So then we also have his third point, which is principles of diversity and symbiosis. So that word itself, symbiosis, is clear for us to start understanding what deep ecology is about. Because deep ecology is looking at the way in which all of life is integrated into the whole. And so that integration is best represented by that really cool word, symbiosis. And knowing that that symbiosis is reliant on diversity as opposed to monoculture, mono agriculture as well, right? So there's an emphasis on multiplicity and diversity and richness that enhances life, as opposed to monoculture, which suppresses variety, right? And then so he, turning to the fourth point he makes, he terms the anti-class posture. Okay, and so this is clear, like, in other words, he's not thinking of these hierarchies that traditional thinking has us trapped in, but rather thinking of more of a network or an emphasis on classless diversity, and what is the source of these problems, because with a reactionary view, we're only seeing one side, and that reactionary is inherently shallow, as he's pointing out. And so when we're looking at reducing resources and pollution control, we might not be looking at other evils that result from that. So again, he's advocating looking at a whole view and not necessarily a hierarchical view that favors only our position, our human position. So again, this is anti-anthropocentric. So in other words, all views and all life forms are important. So how is it that we could start thinking not in a hierarchy, but rather more in a so-called anti-class posture? And then so with 6, we're looking at complexity, not complication. So in other words, I have quoted here, a multiplicity of more or less lawful interacting factors may operate together to form a unity. So I want to repeat that. A multiplicity, so this is a quote, a multiplicity of more or less lawful interacting factors may operate together to form a unity. So in other words, you have a diverse amount of life forms and non-sentient beings within a network that are working together to be one. That idea is rational. It is not a relativist position, okay? So I know that we're hearing this word diversity and difference, And we might start thinking that those are cues to get us to some relativist position, but that is not his position, okay? So, because when we look at that, he's more or less showing us that there's multiplicity acting more or less lawfully with factors that are working together to form a unity. So in other words, we have that key word lawful, that they are working lawfully together. That lawful recognition there is a nod to how this network is rationally understood, okay? So then he's also proposing that in this complexity, not complication category with 6, that we're also showing how within a network, we're also taking into account our own ignorance. So a state of ignorance is still necessary to recognize the whole of our lives and that of other creatures within a system. So if we're thinking of this unity of difference, that unity of difference still must account for the absences in our knowledge in a system. So in other words, we're not totally aware of what that system is as we're working with it, and that ignorance is a key part of how it is that we're going to understand that, so that we're not just complicating things for the sake of making them complicated, right? So then his 7th point is what he's calling local autonomy and decentralization. So in other words, again, this is an emphasis on less top-down approach to ecology and more of what I would call a bottom-up approach. So this is probably something that's made popular by this idea of thinking local as a way to affect the whole, something like that. Act locally in order to understand your small place in relation to the whole, something like that. So then, in general, deep ecology is not just logical or reasonable, because it is that. It goes beyond that, though, to be a emphasis on lived experience within a network, within an environment, and within the whole of Earth itself, okay? And so the values of deep ecology are normative and are held by a vast amount of people beyond just resource depletion and pollution management. So in other words, other people of different religions and different viewpoints, secular, religious folks, all have these metaphysical ways in which we're understanding ourselves in terms of a part to whole relationship, with an emphasis with deep ecology on how the whole is and impacts the parts. In other words, our specific place on the planet, right? So his view of thinking about this personally is what he terms ecosophy as a philosophy of equilibrium within within a so-called descriptive science. So in other words, it's an ethical framework that we're working that we might want to call Spinozistic, okay? So I think that's good for now, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.